I'm a product of the civil rights movement. I grew up in a region where black children couldn't go to the public schools, and lawyers came into my community and made them open up the public schools for me. And but for their intervention, I wouldn't be sitting here. And that history has been replicated in thousands of ways when lawyers have chosen to stand for people who needed someone to stand for them, to speak for people who needed someone to speak for them. My name is Bryan Stevenson. I'm the Executive Director of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. It's a nonprofit human rights organization. We provide legal services to incarcerated and condemned people. And I'm delighted to be here speaking at the Wisconsin Bar Conference. You know, it's really about how we as members of the bar and as leaders have an obligation to provide leadership on critical issues. And the sector that I'm particularly concerned about is our criminal justice system. The United States now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. We went from a prison population of about 300,000 to 2.3 million over the last 40 years, and the collateral consequences of that have been quite significant. And in communities all across this state, there's a lot of despair. There are people who are formerly incarcerated who are having to face real obstacles in recovery. We've got just a huge prison population that has had impacts on poor and minority communities in particular. And I want to talk about some of the things I think we can do to improve the reliability of our system. I think in too many parts of this country, our system treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. And wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. And to change that, I think there's some things we can all do. The first is that I think we can get closer to the problems that exist within our state, and whether we're talking about criminal justice or the educational system or the environment or a whole range of issues, I do believe that lawyers and advocates and judges have an obligation to get close to problems and see the nuances and details of those problems in order to fashion better remedies. The second thing I'll talk about is how I believe that we've got to change some of the narratives that have sustained many of the problems that we are dealing with. And we've been, in many ways, influenced by an era that I define and describe as the politics of fear and anger. We've let a lot of fear and anger shape our commitment to the rule of law in ways that I think has really undermined respect and the integrity of our system. You don't really protect the rule of law. You don't protect basic rights when people get angry and afraid. Those are the ingredients that lead to abuse of the law, abuse of rights. And I think we've got to be vigilant about making sure that our narrative is a narrative rooted in the law and protection of the most vulnerable. The third thing I'll talk about is hopefulness. I just think that if we're really going to make a difference in protecting justice and advancing basic rights, we've got to be hopeful. I'm persuaded that injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. And when lawyers and judges and advocates become hopeless about what they can do, they become vulnerable to tolerating abuse and misconduct and inequality in ways that should not be tolerated. And fourth and finally, I'll ask members of the conference to really think about doing uncomfortable things, because for me, the history of justice is very clear. We don't achieve justice by doing what's comfortable and convenient. Sometimes we have to do uncomfortable things. I'm a product of the civil rights movement. I grew up in a region where black children couldn't go to the public schools, and lawyers came into my community and made them open up the public schools for me. And but for their intervention, I wouldn't be sitting here. And that history has been replicated in thousands of ways when lawyers have chosen to stand for people who needed someone to stand for them, to speak for people who needed someone to speak for them. And sometimes, not always, for high salaries or good remuneration, sometimes because it's the right thing to do. And there are lots of opportunities in this state for the bar, for people who care about justice, to stand and to speak and do things because it's the right thing to do. And I hope members at the conference take that to heart.